We will call the meeting to order. Welcome to the...
Monsieur le Président, avant, si permettez-moi.
Mr. Speaker, if you will allow me, I just wanted to mention to you and to the colleagues that I intend to table the following motion so we may discuss it at our upcoming meeting. Given the systemic problem of over-expenditure in the military procurement, the committee study acquisitions and procurement in the defense area, invite the responsible minister and certain witnesses to appear as soon as possible and report to the House upon recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're bringing that to the subcommittee then, is that correct?
It's okay. Thank you. I'll finish opening the meeting then. That doesn't require any attention. We welcome everyone to the 37th meeting of the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, and we will continue our study on the considering the estimates and supply processes. And we're very pleased today to, very honored in fact, to welcome as our guest and witness Robert Marlow, the former Clerk of the House of Commons, also former Privacy Commissioner and former Information Commissioner. And I know has a long-standing interest and experience with all matters associated with estimate and supply. So we welcome you here very much, Mr. Marlow.
Thank you.
And the floor is yours, and we will entertain questions after your presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a formal presentation. I just made a few notes. You have an hour, so I thought I would spare you the Magna Carta evolution of supply. If you want, though, however, some of that testimony I gave to the precursors of this committee in September 95 and February 97, and I'm sure your very apt researchers can quickly find that evidence, which summarizes the evolution since Confederation of the business of supply. But for today, what I thought I would do is address a couple of the issues that, or trends that I've seen emerging from the testimony you've already adduced from expert witnesses, academics and otherwise, and the Parliamentary Budget Officer. And maybe what I'm now calling is a couple of myths that I think I need to be demystified. And I have a proposal for you, a very practical proposal that is doable within the existing standing orders. It comes in two parts, one with no money and one with new money. And I know new money is kind of a delicate thing these days, but I believe that it might even be a sound investment. First of all, les points principaux qui émergent des témoignages.
The main points out of the testimony you've heard from Mr. Frank, Mr. Vernier, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, seem to focus on the perceived complaints from members that you don't have sufficient information, that you don't get the relevant information, that your capacity to examine the information submitted to Parliament is limited. The other point raised was the timelines for studies. March 1st is when the estimates come down and then reported May 31st. There are 3 sitting weeks, or rather 3 break weeks in that period. So committees have limited time to study the estimates. That said, there have been some analyses done on the flexibility that the executive has granted itself recently in approving transfers of these.
Issue. And I know Mr. McCallum has written an article recently in the Canadian Parliament Review to that effect, where he recommends that that standing order be changed. The deemed reporting concept in the standing orders is one of balance, and to simply remove it would throw the whole supply process out of balance. Because when it was adopted in 1968 as an interim, in the early 70s as a permanent standing order, came with it as a trade-off to the opposition 25 supply days. 25 days where the opposition could set down a motion, some of them with confidence, some of them not, and set the agenda. That was a compensation for having lost those supply days in the Committee of the Whole. So in return, the government was guaranteed its supply by no later than the 30th of June. That was the trade-off. To now remove that and not reconsider the other, I think would throw the whole supply process out of balance. The other, I'll call it myth, and I don't want to offend anybody around the table, Mr. Chairman, is that the documents you get are not complete, are not enough. Well, I think they are. I think it's plenty. I think that the improvements that were made in the 80s and progressively tinkering at the margin with the concepts of plans and priority reports, the departmental performance reports, combined with the tabling of the estimates, if you want, at a high level on the 1st of March. Those reports read together, all three parts, are more than enough. I've been on the drafting side of planning and priority reports, and I've had to argue with Treasury Board about program architecture and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it is quite detailed, maybe too detailed in some cases, but I think you have all the information that is required to do a proper study of the estimates. The other myth is the fact that committees cannot make reports on estimates to the House with substantive recommendations. The PBO officer referred to a 1979 ruling that changed that. Actually, it wasn't 1979. It was June 18, 1973, by Speaker Lamoureux, who for the first time said, committees on estimates have only inherited the old powers of the Committee of Supply to adopt, negative, or reduce. And therefore, substantive motion, a substantive recommendation in a report was out of order since the Committee of Supply didn't have that power. However, that ruling is moot now, in my view, because you've got Standing Order 108. If you look at Standing 108, all of the expenditure plans of government by department are permanently before the committee, yours and the others. So to say that now you cannot make substantive recommendations to the government on matters of expense or supply, you might not be able to do it within a report on the estimates, but you've got ample access to make all the recommendations you like. So anyone who is now hanging on to that Speaker's ruling in 1973, I think, is dated, if I can put it that way. Finally, there's the PBO. The PBO, and you will remember this, Mr. Chairman, because you were on that committee when C2, the FED-AA Act, was before committee. I was invited as an expert witness. And I wasn't very supportive of the PBO concept. I think I call it congressional creep. We have a tendency to want to borrow out of other political cultures and other constitutional cultures elements that we think may fit. I caution you about Australia and New Zealand on that when you hear your witnesses next week, my two very good friends, Harry Evans and David McGee. They are different political cultures. You have a Senate that's elected by proportional representation in Australia, and you have a unicameral system in New Zealand, and a very transparent style of government in terms of access to information, cabinet competences, and all that sort of thing. The PBO, I argued at the committee, should have an estimates mandate. And the committee agreed. And indeed, the act was amended, and it was given an estimates mandate. I don't think it's done much with it, and I don't think the committees have done much in terms of exploiting it. So there's a bit of a congressional influence there from without the money and without the size and without the staff. Again, fitted in the library in the wrong place as far as I'm concerned, as I said at the time. So those are the myths I wanted to put on the table and hopefully give you some insight on my thinking, that I don't believe that they are impediments to the study of estimates. If I may, I'll make a proposal. And it comes from something I haven't seen in your committee document. It's an article written by two former MPs, Ron Huntington and Claude-André Lachance, back in the early 80s, when this very study was going on, following some 10, 12 years of experience with the estimates going to all committees. And it came up with a couple of concepts about macro estimates committees that would be charged with just that. And from there flows my proposal to you. MPs are spenders. They're not savers. You all come here because you have an agenda. Very few of you got elected with the promise that you would reduce the estimates of the government. So it's kind of a challenge for the average MP to get into the estimates when going in at the front end, you can't do anything about them much. You can reduce them, you can negative them, you can, and so over the years, over the last 40 years, MPs have given up. The opening line of the last report in in 2003, the Alcock Committee, was a quote from myself that basically said that I felt that the House had abandoned its constitutional responsibility to review supply. I didn't know they were going to use that as the opening line, but they did. Here's what I'm proposing. This committee should get a new mandate, an expanded mandate. It should be called something else. It could keep government operations as part of its title, but I think it should be called the Appropriations Committee. The mandate should be in the standing orders. And the standing orders should be an instruction to this committee to, within 60 days of its appointment, to table in the House a 5-year plan of study and review of government appropriations and estimates. Because you have to look to the past to make sense of what is being proposed. So you can't say that the estimates just evaporate once they're deemed reported. They don't. They're there. They exist. And you have access to them. The composition of the committee should be made permanent. Now, let's be realistic. There's only 308 MPs. There are too many committees, not enough MPs, not enough committee rooms. There's all kinds of issues. There's a block system where you can only meet twice a week and you can't meet out of your... I mean, those are all impediments that are not necessarily relevant today, but they contribute to it. The whips are the major problem in committees and have been since the 90s, since the Liberals returned to power. And Mr. Mulroney was much more generous with powers to committees and their membership. Some of you may remember Don Blencarn, who was chair of that committee, Finance Committee, for years and years. And when they tried to take him out, there was a revolt in the House, not just in the opposition. So the membership should be made permanent. By that I mean the duration of a session, and the whip should not be allowed to intervene. The chair should be elected for the duration of the Parliament, like the Speaker, the Deputy Speaker is. Deputy Speaker is elected for the duration of the Parliament. And the member and the vice chairs, the chair should come from the opposition, as it is, and the vice chair should come from the government. And the vice chair should be appointed for the duration of Parliament as well. That way, over time, you've got, if the House switches sides, you've got experience in vice chairs on one side of the House, experience in chairs on the other side of the House, and there could be a continuity to the role of that committee. You should have the usual powers and papers and persons report to the House with recommendations, and power to appoint subcommittees, and each vice chair could have a subcommittee of their own as part of this 5-year review plan. That plan will be published, tabled in the House. The government, the bureaucracy would know exactly what's coming down the pipe in terms of macro studies. Concurrently, the estimates every year get referred to the committees for the usual round of the review of supply process. And like the Statutory Instruments Committee, some of you may not have discovered this yet, but the Statutory and Regulations Committee has access to the House for a debate every Wednesday at 1 o'clock. Doesn't happen very often. And they have the power to revoke a regulation. And the minister shows up, committee of the whole style, and he must explain why he will not revoke that regulation. And if he doesn't show up, it's automatically revoked. So you have an hour that would not interfere with government time. It's there, it's 1 to 2. It's committee time, it's never used. This committee should have access to that hour. And your reports with recommendations should be the subject. Mano a mano with, mano a mano with the minister on the floor, committee of the whole style, not 40 bureaucrats, maybe the deputy minister sitting in front of his minister advising him, as to why the government accepts or doesn't accept the recommendations on a particular study. And it could be a vote, doesn't have to be confidence, but it could be a vote, and it's deferrable anyway, so there's no surprise to the government. And that way, I think you would revitalize the process, bring MPs back into it in terms of an interest, bring the minister in on it. You know, most ministers come to committee on estimates, a perfunctory statement, and then they turn it over to the accounting officer, deputy minister, and you may never see the minister again. And the PBO should be the staff, core staff of this committee. PBO should be moved out of the library, into the committee's branch, made a full-fledged officer of the House. Half of its budget, whatever it is today, I have no idea, but half of his budget should be spendable by this committee on studies, the other half by other committees on estimates as they apply for it. And take it out of the reach of the liaison committee, which has just become a tool for the whip to control where committees are going and how much they're spending. And not just in this government. The previous government did the same thing going back to the Chrétien days. The Board of Internal Economy has just cut $3.8 million out of committee spending. And that's too bad. It's tragic, actually, particularly that the Galliano plan in the 90s cut out $4 million. So it's not just one government here. There's an evolution. There's at least $12 million of missing money in committee spending over the last decade, which could be spent on things like the PBO and committee study of estimates. This first part is all doable in the standing orders. You don't have to ask the government for permission to do this. All you have to do is change it. Take the leadership on the government leader side, but it's all standing order changes. You don't have to go back and change the bureaucracy's performance, the budget timing. All of that's doable in standing orders. Now, if you want to put some new money in it, pay the chairman the same as the deputy speaker. If the chairman or the chairperson is going to be there for the duration of the Parliament, there's only one way to...
Motion to that effect, if anyone would like to.
And pay the vice chairs the same as the parliamentary secretary. Because if you want MPs to invest part of their political career in accountability exercise, then you're going to have to find a way to compensate that. The members of the committee should be paid the same as committee chairs are paid currently. Now, I know it's not popular right now to spend money on MPs or raise their pay or whatever, but if you're going to give it some credibility, usually there's money attached to credibility. Give the committee a budget outside of the committee control. That may mean new money, and increase the PBO funding, but limit its mandate to appropriations and supply. I know that Mr. Werner, one of the witnesses here, was quite intrigued with the PBO as a concept. I'm not sure we need a parallel finance department in Parliament. That's all I'm going to say about the role of PBO. But you do need the help on estimates. You need the long-term help, and you need to build a cadre of professional researchers who can, over time, put things together for you with a sense of perspective. I think I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chairman. I've already gone too long.
Oh, Mr. Marlowe, thank you very much for that presentation. Plenty of food for thought on this. We will go right into questions, and Alexander Boulouris for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le...
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Marlowe, for your succinct but enlightening presentation. Yeah, obviously, you have a great deal of experience and knowledge. And so it was really quite interesting. You used the word accountability, and I think that is the basis for this exercise we're engaged in and the work that we will be doing as parliamentarians and as legislators. In your opinion, how do you assess this current government's level of transparency and accountability? Not that long ago, I was the Information Commissioner, and I would refer you to my reports at the time that were not perhaps lauding transparency. Transparency is like a motherhood and apple pie issue. It's kind of impossible to say. I mean, there's never too much transparency. But when I would say we're lagging far behind other parliaments in that area from other countries. Similar studies to the one we're doing on expenditures, this type of thing has been done, and we can see that there are a host of obstacles to our work when we try to assess the government spending. There was a 1998 report, the 2003 report, that were ignored. And we see many things have been non-applied or indeterminate, etc. Do you think that the study that we're doing can be a serious study? Can it be useful? In the current situation, will the executive be willing to give away some of its power to allow the legislative to be shorn up so that there's a bit more balance? I said that it would require some leadership on the government's part, and we can't change the standing orders without the government being in agreement. As I've said, the government's response to the two reports you referred to are weak, and Treasury Board says, well, this requires an amendment to the standing orders, so we put that in the hands of Parliament. That might be an easy way of saying we disagree, but washing one's hands of it. There would have to be some agreement between the leader, the opposition, to take that initiative. But the way that you could sell this is that this type of committee could be quite positive for a government. It would be quite positive to have this perspective. Parliamentarians' view on matters, on very specific studies over a 5-year period. And I say 5 years because perhaps it would carry over to the first year of the next Parliament as well. So it's not entirely negative. It's not a committee that would be on a witch hunt. This is something other committees could do at all times in the process. The estimates process. It's easy to witch hunt, but this would be more on the public accounts model. At this point, there's no way to influence the course of events, whereas this committee could, I think, unlike public accounts, this committee could, I mean, over time, not overnight, through its recommendations, start to influence the direction taken in certain areas of expenditures. And this could be very, very useful to a minister. If there was support for this minister from these members in a democracy. You said committees need more time to do the study of the estimates and that we need help. And I would say that, yes, you're right. Because here we receive a document we have to read rather quickly, and there are very few meetings where we can really study the matter and have ministers appear before us. Another witness was saying that the main estimates, if you divide that by the number of pages there are $500 million of spending on each one of these pages, and we only have 5 minutes worth of questions. Is this a very genuine process or serious process? Well, it's a cycle. It's the budgetary cycle. In the 1997 report, there's a good diagram on it and how continuous it is. And there might have been a few changes, but I can't see why you could not address these matters. June 30th, they're passed. Sorry, July 2nd, rather. You could readdress this issue. Performance reports, specifically, are tabled too late. This year, RPPs will not be tabled before May 7th, and that's tragic, I'd say. You should change the regulations requiring that RPPs be tabled at the same time as the estimates March 1st, at the same time. That might make sense, or you could make sense out of it. But the idea that it be discretionary, and to my mind, or to my knowledge, it's the first time that there's been a delay in the RPPs. I don't know if it's administrative or what, but performance reports are perhaps in October, November. And supply, last day of supply is December 10th. You have 1 month left to look at previous performance. Performance reports, and I've written some myself, should be tabled on the first sitting day in September. The public accounts are closed. Sorry, Mr. Chair, I see you're giving me a sign, but the public accounts will be closed, and then they could be tabled in time, the first day of the sitting day in September.
Thank you, Mr. Ruiz. Mike Wallace for 5 minutes, please.
I thank Mr. Chair, and Mr. Marl, thank you for coming, and I may follow up with some of your suggestions. I really appreciate you bringing a suggestion. We actually had a brief discussion with some people today about maybe we should have one super committee that looks at estimates and basically what you're advocating for. But I want to go back a little bit. I do understand the history of where the deemed issue came from, and that was a trade-off. I understand that. I think what at least from my perspective, and I think John's, the concept was, the deemed was that committees aren't looking at it at all, that if we were going to remove the deemed rule, there will be a requirement to at least spend an hour, 2 hours, one meeting looking at it by a certain deadline. So we wouldn't be giving up the one side completely. they're still going to get their 25 days. We still expect support at their whatever that then passed by a certain time. The other issue that I wouldn't mind a comment on was what our issue has been is that like we had our budget last week. We had mains. We're starting our fiscal year as of yesterday. The timing of the budget is not reflected in the mains. And then we have A's and B's are usually pretty big. Then we have C's. What the thought was is that what if we have the budget previous, or we move the fiscal year end to 3 or 4 months from now, and that the mains are not presented till they have at least an opportunity to incorporate at least some of what was in the budget, if not all of what was in the budget. Do you see an issue with moving the timing, whether the budget is in late fall or the budget stays in the same time frame now? And my understanding, there is no law saying that actually has to be a budget by a certain time. Maybe we should change that also in terms of a standing order. But we move that date so that the mains then would be more reflective of what was actually in the budget. And then, in my view, the plans and priority documents, which I don't think are exactly the same at every department, may be able to reflect what was more that was in the budgetary plans for the government. Would you comment on that?
Well, I can comment on both issues. The deemed reported issue, I think it should stay there in the standing orders, not for the reasons I said, but you're still under the gun to adopt, reduce, or negatize within that period. After that, they're gone from the committee in terms of the capacity to reduce or in fact, adopt them. So I think that's a necessary dynamic holdover from the old Committee of Supply. But as I said, on June the 1st, understanding Order 108, you can pick up exactly where you left off on the 31st. The only thing you don't have before you is the capacity to reduce them again. They're gone. But the substantive part of the estimates are still before the committee. So in terms of continuing to influence the process, I think that's why I call it a myth that somehow they evaporate on the 31st of May. The second component to your question, sorry, I just lost my train of thought, was, the budget cycle. I mean, if the committee is considering looking at changing the larger components of budget making in Canada, chances are your report's going to go the same way the other two went. I'm not an advocate of the budget being tabled and the mains tabled to reflect the budget. The budget in Westminster models, and particularly in Canada and our culture, is really a policy statement by the government of what it intends to do in the next cycle. The mains that are tabled on the 1st of March are largely a reflection of the last budget. I've never done an analysis, but I would say there'd be 60 or 70% the last budget. And the government has the capacity to come back to Parliament in those 3 ABCs to alter what it tabled on the 1st of March, against any new initiatives launched in the budget. So that comes before the House again. So to me, it's workable. It might be neat to have nice little rows on a piece of paper that show exactly how everything fits. But the reality, I think, of running a country is not the reality of running a corporation. And whether it's accrual or cash, those kinds of issues don't matter much, I think, to parliamentarians. Government is there, and it is accountable to the House. You're to hold it accountable. It has the spending initiative. To me, we have all of the tools to do it properly. I don't propose myself that having a budget that is clean to the estimates is desirable. I don't think it's possible either.
Thank you. One little clarification. Your speaker's ruling that was a number of years ago, basically, and the way I've been operating is that we can approve, disapprove, or reduce. Are you telling me today that you think that ruling is not in order, and that we could be doing other things as a committee? Or I just didn't understand exactly what you were saying.
When it comes to the estimates themselves, the supply, That's all you can do. What the Speaker ruled was that the committees, at the same time, had the power to report to the House. And what they were doing is say, we approve of these estimates, but we make the following recommendations. They were very neutral recommendations because they use language that the government considered the advisability of building a second port in St. John's, something like that. It wasn't binding. But back then, committee reports were debated on routine proceedings. And they were also being used as a dilatory tactic because after a question period on a Wednesday, it would be committee reports before government orders. We'd start debating a committee report, and it would go to the hour of adjournment before it's transferred. So the Speaker, I think, was concerned that all of a sudden there was a new dilatory tactic that was brought out. That doesn't exist anymore. The standing orders have evolved differently. It's very hard to use a committee report for a dilatory purpose. Plus, if you take the existing hour, it's there, 1 to 2. Nobody loses. Government doesn't lose any time. Only you as involved parliamentarians would invest in that time. Likely members of this committee, short speeches, 5 minutes on the floor, committee of the whole style, questions and answers, and maybe, not necessarily a vote, that would be up to the committee report. So all of that stuff around the limits on committees on supply, in terms of what members want to do, has evaporated in my view. You have access which you didn't have before.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mike. Matthew Ravniak.
Donc, j'ai envie de vous demander.
I'd like to ask you about the concentration of power. One of our witnesses at our last meeting showed that there is at least a trend globally to give a bit more leeway to the legislative side and take that from the executive side. You referred to the way in which we use committees, the way we apply the standing orders. Do you think this is symptomatic? Since the times of Mulroney, symptomatic of a concentration of power in the Prime Minister's office. What do you think explains this? Well, Mr. Chairman, that would be the subject of a long thesis, wouldn't it? You have 5 minutes. Yes, I know. Is it a national trend? I did read the witness's testimony. Canada is seen as an example with the parliamentary budget officer, and perhaps this is something that is positive. I would say that in the Westminster system, accountability is the responsibility of the House. The responsibility is something that belongs to government. It's been sort of a 600-year game of pulling to one side and then pulling to the other. The Westminster-style system is adversarial.
C'est un concept constitutionnel.
So that's a constitutional concept. How far can the legislative go in directing the executive? I get back to this notion of congressional creep. I did not like in the 1990s the way private members' bills evolved and go to a vote. You're not a House of Representatives representative. You are there to represent your riding. The power to initiate legislation, the issue of expenditures. This is all something that belongs to the government, and it is the House that is accountable, the members on the government and at opposition side as well, in the scope or breadth of these expenses. Should the legislative branch govern the country? No, but there are a host of examples in our standing orders that date back to the 1980s of this congressional creep, as I call it, which is a completely different system than ours.
Of budget making in Washington. Don't go there.
C'est quand même un peu bizarre qu'on ait ces outils-là.
It is a bit strange that we should have these tools at our disposal, but you seem to be saying they're underused? Is that what you're saying? Well, the quote that I referred to, I would never have said it while I was the clerk, of course, but was that, in my opinion, parliamentarians have cast aside this role, and in time there was erosion of this interest. What's the incentive for a member to really comb through this, industry department's budget, for instance? If the only thing the member can do is reduce or negative or vote against, what's the incentive if he can't make any recommendations? Well, we were hoping the incentive would be a desire to govern the country well, ensure sound management or administration. But I'll move to another question. You made some comments about the parliamentary budget officer, which I found quite interesting. In your opinion, is this PBO, does he have enough authority? And if not, what authority should he have? At this point, he has none, I would say. He has no authority. In fact, he complains about it, and I see him complain in the newspapers that he doesn't have access to documents. If he were an officer of the House connected to this committee, he would, because a motion for the presentation of documents or the attendance of a witness at a parliamentary committee, that's rather well respected. But the PBO at this point has no power nor authority. So it's the appearance of transparency on the part of this government here. Well, I'm not trying to ascribe motives here. I appeared at the time. I said it was the wrong place and that there was a bit of the mandate or part of his mandate that was missing. If you want to give Parliament or the House of Commons the things that will allow for the government to be accountable, then it's not in the current formula that you'll find the solution.
Anytime, that's glamorous. But I think having to respond to a committee report asking you to do a specific job and a specific analysis, say over a 5-year plan, that would be more effective.
Merci.
Very good. Thank you, Matthew. For the Conservatives, Peter Braid. 5 minutes, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Marlowe, for being here this afternoon. A very interesting presentation. I want to circle back to a couple of points that you made in your opening presentation. One of your suggestions was that this committee should become an appropriations committee. And I wanted to ask how the mandate of the committee would change in that case.
Well, the mandate would be binding. The way I would draft the standing orders is that this 5-year study to be tabled within 5-year study plan to be tabled in the House, say in the first 60 days of its appointment, would be a mandatory instruction from the House. It shall do it, just like the Procedure Committee shall review the standing orders. So in that sense, it's been given a specific accountability mandate way beyond what it has now. It has standing, in a sense, because not many committees have that. And you permanently have the expenditures past, present, and future before the committee. If it was equipped with the proper staff, obviously you can't sit there as members and go through all of the estimates line by line, but equipped with proper staff and a plan that you agreed to, I think you could have some impact.
And twinned with that, you suggested that the mandate of the PBO should change. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I think the mandate of the PBO should be largely in support of committees on supply. If you're studying whether the OAS should be reduced or not, the age of the qualification be reduced or not, you've got ample access to experts out there who can come in on contract and work with you or witnesses. But there's nobody out there. There's only one former clerk alive. That's me. There's no one out there in the private sector who understands the supply process and the supply details. So you need a staff that's on it, that is continuity for you and for the next committee and the one thereafter, much like you have with the library and the researchers. So I'm not saying that the PBO should not have the mandate it has now. I'm saying it hasn't exercised part of its mandate. As far as I know, there's not been a lot of work done by the PBO on estimates, and it's been before them, with them, from day one. And I would move it out of the library. It's kind of a barnacle on the side of the library there. And you remember the tussles that they had at the very beginning of the creation of the office. Poor man didn't know who he reported to and what he was supposed to do. It's not a criticism. I'm just saying it's in the wrong place. Put it in the House, put it in the committee's branch, make it an officer of the House, and then that office has to conduct itself. Right now, it's largely kind of, the perception, at least on the outside, it's largely an opposition function. Why can't you as government have access to some of this information and direct through your majority control from time to time certain studies that you want done? It's not sufficient for government parliamentarians to say you've got all the bureaucracy. I think as parliamentarians sitting in government, you can have influence on your own government and hold them accountable for some of the things that they do. That doesn't have to be negative, and it doesn't have to be a confidence issue, and you shouldn't get booted out of caucus because you have a point of view on a particular aspect of spending.
A final question. You also you spoke about Standing Order 108, and I think you implied that it's really an underutilized standing order at this point in time. Could you elaborate on how Standing Order 108 could be more fully utilized and what its role is?
Well, Standing Order 108 came into being in the late 80s, 87 I believe it is, following the adoption of the McGraw reforms under Mr. Mulroney. And the idea was to give the committees the power to initiate their own studies within their remit. Because before, committees used to have to wait for an order of reference from the House. They had to wait for the estimates. Why do members past, I won't say present yet, members past go looking for scandals in the estimates? Because in the past, that's the only way they could get at them. They had to wait for the House to give them an order. Now with 108, committees are empowered to begin with their whatever kind of study they want within relevant sense. How is it important to the relationship of supply? Is that up until then, 87, when the estimates were deemed reported, as I said before, the perception is that the estimates have evaporated and the issues with it. Wrong. 108 continues to give you that access. And I have not seen very many committees who've used 108 to pursue a supply study after the estimates have been adopted.
Your time is up, Peter. Thank you very much. Who are we? John McCallum for the Liberals. John?
Well, thank you. I'm afraid I'm a little bit confused about your proposal and exactly what it would do. You said within 60 days there would be a report on expenditures over a 5-year period, I think. Is this a committee that would essentially do estimate reviews and provide proposals on that, or would it be doing separate studies on related issues and reporting on that? What would it do that's different from what happens today?
This new Appropriations Committee would, within 60 days of it being appointed, file a report with the House with a study plan for the next 5 years.
A study plan?
Here's what we're going to do with the appropriations and the estimates for the next 5 years.
Okay, and what would such a plan look like?
Well, it could pick 6 or 7 departments, and for the next 5 years, the studies would relate from the last set of appropriations to the one being proposed, or to a particular issue flowing from that department, be it procurement or whatever, or another part could be thematic. It could be, we're going to look across government on procurement, as an example, and we'll report these to the House and make recommendations.
And so, it's in the context of such reports that we would ask questions of the minister in the House.
That's right. That's right. That if a report was tabled in the House and you chose to concur it in, you would take up that debate between 1 and 2 on Wednesdays, and the minister would be present and would have to answer for that report.
Okay. Well, thank you. That clarifies that in my mind. You're, I think, the only witness, the only one I remember, who doesn't think it's necessary for the budget to coincide with the estimates in terms of timing. I tend to agree with the others, I think. and maybe because I'm a politician, I'm more concerned about timing, that when we get information in the budget, it tends to render the estimates that we're dealing with now obsolete, because the latest information, including the cuts and everything else, are not in the estimates. And you say it's impossible, but many, many other countries do it. In fact, the OECD person told us we were a rare and bad exception to the rule among most countries. So I guess I don't understand why you say we couldn't do it, and I also don't understand why you don't think it would be good if we could do it.
Well, I'm not an international expert on budget making, but I'll restate what I said to Mr. McCallum. I believe that the budget is a policy statement by the government on what it intends to do. It's not a binding legal piece of paper put on the table and that the estimates have to match it. There are things in the budget at the present time which change. I'll give you an example. The McEachin's first budget, 1980, 81, had proposed capital gains on transfer of farm sales within a family. That didn't happen. As the groundswell worked its way through Parliament and whatever, Mr. McEachin, a large part of that budget was never implemented. So I see it as a policy statement. The Auditor General may see it as a bookkeeping operation. You've got 5 days debate on the budget, and it's about policy. You move amendments. You don't amend line 44 of the budget. You move an amendment that is going to impact on that policy, and it may be confidence. So those experts from the OECD maybe don't understand the Westminster model and how supply is crafted. The Crown will ask you your agreement before it takes your cows to feed its soldiers, and it's that basic. Now, how many cows it takes and how many soldiers it feeds may vary according to whether they're at war or not, and that's a policy statement.
Okay. Well,
1 minute.
I may be wrong in my memory, but I seem to remember that Australia and New Zealand do it coincidentally, and I think they are Westminster. And I guess I don't disagree with you, budget is a policy statement, but it's also a policy statement that contains measures. And when you want to review the expenditures of the government over the coming year, you want to have all the most up-to-date possible information in conducting that review. And I guess we'd be willing to take the risk that certain elements of the budget might not pass, as in the days of McEachern some 30-plus years ago. So I guess I disagree.
Well, we can agree to disagree, Mr. McCallum. I don't have a fundamental mental block. I really don't see what it adds to the parliamentary supply process to have a budget which mirrors the estimates or vice versa. I know how the cycle works in the bureaucracy. Don't imagine that the Treasury Board ministers, and you've been there, Treasury Board ministers have gone through a fine-tooth comb with every element of that $250 billion. The most powerful bureaucrat in the country is the Treasury Board analyst. The young man or young woman who's interacting with the government departments or parts thereof and saying, yeah, I don't think we can put this before ministers, they're the ones who have more influence than parliamentarians have right now. So in the context of a budget which should mirror spending, it has to by the sub-Cs in the end of the year. There's a dynamic that flows through Parliament with sub-As, Bs, and Cs which flow from budget, and some of it not even in the budget. So what do you do as a government if you want to do something and you didn't put it in the budget? And it may be necessary to do it. So I don't see what it adds to your role as an MP. It may make the Auditor General more comfortable because he can read, a bottom line that matches another bottom line.
Thank you, John. I've been letting the time go a little bit because the exchanges have been very interesting. Now, Jacques Gourde.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to Mr. Marleau for your attendance. Your testimony has been very interesting. You were saying earlier on that perhaps the committee could change or improve its mandate to do some further studies in some areas. You also referred to the fact that there's limited time in the year to do this work. Would you suggest we have more committee time, or perhaps come back and sit in areas during riding weeks, if you will, or break weeks? You know, we have limited time, but at the same time, regardless of the study we want to do, if we want to go in further go into certain issues in further depth, then we're going to have to spend more time on that. Would this be a committee that would have a more macroeconomic mandate? How would you suggest? How much time do you think this would involve? Well, the committee would have a macroeconomic mandate, and it could be as macro as it likes, or as it would like to be, or perhaps more specific. You could have more specific studies on say, procurement, as I was saying. There are only 308 members. If you set aside cabinet, those that are in the speaker's chair, the parliamentary secretary, etc., the whips, who do you have to populate committees? And then when you divide that by the number of committees that sit, well, you're already overburdened. I can tell you that. Severely so, I would say, and that's why you have associate members and supernumerary people on these lists of committees. This is an exception, this committee, but in some committees you never have the same faces around the table from one meeting to the next, in part because of that. And to some extent, members have various duties, and the committee may suffer as a result. If you sit on this committee, I would suggest that you be sitting members for the entire session, and the whip should not count on you for other committees. This is your committee, the one that studies supply, and you would have the mandate to do this without any interference from the whip. Why is the Deputy Speaker of the House getting a supplementary salary? Because it ties this MP's hands and is in the Speaker's chair. I mean, would you volunteer to do that for free? Probably not, because you have other things to attend to as a member of Parliament. And you also need specialists. And in time, these members would become specialists on macroeconomic matters, supply, finance. So, Mr. Marleau, to meet this goal, if we are in one committee, then you would actually have to have this member sit on this one committee solely. And given the limited number of members we have available and the number of committees we have, or we would keep the same group, or we would reorganize all committees. And as a matter of fact, you might require fewer committees. I can say that it's not the first time that I would have said there are too many committees. I think that there are some committees that still exist for political perception reasons. I won't name them, but you know as well as I do that there are committees with certain titles because we want to please a certain group in our society. Could there be sort of joint committees with the Senate? I mean, the Senate is doing, perhaps it's a duplication of work. Some committees could involve both parliamentarians and rather MPs and senators. Would we be able to manage that, reach that same objective? Canada, being a bicameral system, a non-elected Senate, does not have the same, I would say there's not the same level of accountability on the Senate side. In Australia, the system is different because it's an elected Senate. It's proportional. There's never a huge majority in the Senate. The compromises, the results, the outcome are different. The committee that works really quite well, that we never hear about, is the Statutory Instruments Committee. It's a joint committee that looks at regulations, has the power to revoke them, and can engage in a debate in the House. From 1 to 2 on Wednesdays. Why would this committee never use that time? Because the brilliant staff at the Library of Parliament that supports them, when there's a call into the department, people would say, well, there's a problem with this regulation, the committee's considering revoking it. More often than not, those regulations are changed or revoked by the government, by the department in question. That's the influence that this committee can have. But it's the threat that there would be the minister appearing on the floor for an hour and having to explain this or that, this is what keeps things going, and this is how I would perceive this committee having a new mandate and having the ability to influence those recommendations, some kind of financial behavior in the public service, etc.
We're getting close to, we only have Mr. Marlowe with us until 4:30. We've concluded one complete round, and we have enough time for one more questioner, and it would be Denis Blanchette for 5 minutes, and then unfortunately that's all the time we have Mr.
Merci,
Marlowe
Monsieur
here for.
Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Marleau. Most people say, well, most people have a pessimistic view of the work that we do here. Some things were attempted in 1998, some things in 2003, but you seem to be saying that we're not really playing fair, playing the right way, if you will, in our sandbox. Somebody said that these Westminster system within the OECD, that those types of parliaments are lagging behind within the OECD. It seems as though you're saying you view things in a different way. What is happening in our Westminster-style parliaments, whereby we're having a hard time restructuring our procedures or way of doing things, modernizing them? I like your expression about the sandbox and not playing well, if you will, in the sandbox. I think it summarizes my presentation. It's not something that just happened overnight. It's not the first time I've appeared before this kind of committee and leaving this kind of impression. Westminster-style parliaments, if you take, for instance, Westminster itself in London, one thing that's in their favor is that the term for MPs is longer than in Canada. When I retired, the average length of a term would be 4 years. Over there, it could be 16 to 18 years. That's the standard. Second thing is they've got a larger chamber, almost 700 members of parliament. Not everyone can even be on a committee. Some people are in government and never in cabinet. So the dynamics are completely different. And I think here, unfortunately, and this has been the case not only since this government, but under other governments, previous governments as well, is that partisanship has grown to the point where it's almost become a poison. It's poisoned the parliamentary process. In the 1970s, when committees had the same powers as you on supply, there were far more compromises between government and the opposition. Far less partisanship, less whip interference. Because if you allow me, the suggestions you're making, in an ideal world, that would be wonderful. But in the context of this type of parliament, so partisan as it is, it could be a catastrophe. If this committee's mandate is permanent, if appointments to the committee are permanent or standing, and the chairmanship as well, then you'd still be around the same table for 3 or 4 years even. I can assure you there would be a collegial atmosphere that's just impossible today. Why? Because you have to face you'd have to face each other for 3 years, and you can't fall into partisanship in the same way, any more so than you could. You know, there are some committees in the House where partisanship is perhaps lessened. For instance, procedure and House Affairs, public accounts, those are just two. But if there was a mandate over a 5-year plan and a vision, I don't think you would fall into the same degree of partisanship. Some people feel that what we're doing today here is going to be a failure. If I were to ask you, what would be, as a committee, what would be the winning conditions for us so that we may transform our way of doing business, what would you say? First of all, a unanimous report from this committee would be very strong, and that would require an initiative on the government side to create that. The responses given to the last report, the English word is a bit of a Minnie Mouse response. The winning conditions would require that there be parliamentary participation in accountability, and that be active, that it produce something for the government as well. Aside from that, it depends on the individuals themselves. The composition of the committee is important. You know, I've been following this issue for 40 years now. Major change was in 1970 because the government wanted it, and the second one was in 87 because the government wanted it. You're going to get the same answer as you got in the last two reports if the government doesn't want it. For winning conditions, you need the support from government to make your role in the business of supply more relevant.
Mr. Marlowe, I want to thank you very, very much for very helpful, very interesting, and very, very frank briefing. I have one point of clarification that the clerk has pointed out. You've said a number of times you think committee members should be appointed for the entire session. Did you mean for the entire Parliament or the parliamentary session?
Session, because by parliamentary session, I mean that period between the call letters and prorogation. But
Yes.
without whip
I
interference. Without whip interference.
I see.
Because as parliamentarians, there are various levels of seniority and expertise, and you may want to get on with part of your life doing something else than appropriations for a full 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So there would be a chance for some membership rotation in those windows, but the chair should be there for the full 5 years, as the vice chair should be.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Marlowe. We found it very, very interesting. We may even wish to call you back as we go further in our study. It's very, very helpful. Thank
Whatever I
you for
can do,
being here.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for listening to me, and I apologize for being a little winded on some of the answers.
Not at all, but very helpful, very useful. Thank you. We're going to suspend while we change up our witnesses then. reconvene then our meeting, the 37th meeting of Government Operations on the study of estimates and supply. And now we're very pleased to welcome a former colleague and former chair of the Public Accounts Committee, Chief Executive Officer of Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption, and someone who's well known to all of us and has a great wealth of experience in this subject, Mr. John Williams. You're very welcome here, John. Please, you have the floor for as long as you see fit, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and my congratulations to you. It's nice that we've worked together in public accounts, and nice to see you sitting there as a chair.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the invitation to appear before the Government Operations and Estimates Committee today to present on the estimates process by which Parliament reviews the estimates or funds requested by the government. It is an honour for me to be here. This is the nation's house where the nation's business is transacted, and it is a pleasure to be invited to appear before you. In a democracy, the people have every right to expect that taxes are used in a manner that is acceptable to the people. The House of Commons has a responsibility to represent the wishes and desires of the people and to ensure, by way of approval of the estimates, that the government spending is prudent and in the best interests of the people. And since nothing happens without spending, it makes the approval of the business of supply the most important role of the House of Commons. Control of the public purse by Parliament has its origins in the Magna Carta, signed by King John in 1215, when the King agreed to accept the common council of our realm when levying and assessing an aid or scutage, and scutage being what we call taxes today. Parliament has control of the public purse down through the ages and is still very much at the core of our democratic government. Today, Standing Order number 80 clearly indicates that the House of Commons still retains that authority by stating all aids and supplies granted to the Sovereign by the Parliament of Canada are the sole gift of the House of Commons. That puts it in perspective, Mr. Chairman. The government has no money except that given by the House of Commons. For the fiscal year ended March 31st, 2011, according to the financial statements audited by the Auditor General, the government spent $270.5 billion granted by the House of Commons by way of approval of supply. That volume of spending poses a quandary for the members of Parliament. Given that amount and complexity of proposed spending by the government, how are members supposed to be able to scrutinize it properly? If you want to look at the detail, the mountain of paper would be so big that you would not know where to start. If you want a manageable amount of paper, the overview contains so little detail that there are no apparent questions to ask. In addition to that, of course, the government considers the estimates to be a matter of confidence, and what backbencher wants to carry the responsibility of triggering an election? And it doesn't stop there. Let us suppose that a parliamentary committee recommended a reduction in the estimates. First, it can only be debated and voted on a supply day, and should it pass and the estimates be reduced, the government could consider it a loss of confidence and trigger an election. However, even without a supply day vote, a reduction recommended by a committee would cause the President of the Treasury Board to introduce a motion to restore or reinstate the original amount of if the proposed reduction was not acceptable to the government. The vote on the motion to restore or reinstate the government's request for funds is a vote on an opposed item, and the adoption of this motion overrides the committee's recommended reduction, which means nothing will happen. In June 1995, the Procedure and House Affairs Committee created a subcommittee on the business of supply, and I was privileged to sit on that committee. The report of which you all have copies, I believe, is, I think, the best and most comprehensive report on the business of supply in Canada in modern times. I would like, Mr. Chairman, to acknowledge Mr. Brian O'Neill of the Library of Parliament, who was the principal researcher of the subcommittee, whose great work contributed immensely to the quality of the report. In addition to placing the business supply in a historical perspective, the recommendations of the report can be broken down into 6 areas. 1, the creation of an estimates committee with overarching authority on the business of supply. 2, the confidence convention and the business of supply. 3, granting committees the capacity to reallocate up to 5% within the department under review. 4, long-term cyclical reviews of statutory spending, which we call program spending. review of Crown corporations that do not report through a minister, a review of tax expenditures and loan guarantees. The subcommittee, Mr. Chairman, reported back to the Procedure and House Affairs Committee with this report, which was adopted by the Procedure and House Affairs Committee in late 1996 or early 1997. The report was subsequently tabled in the House of Commons, but the House was dissolved for an election in April 1997, and the report died on the order paper. I was unable to have it resurrected by the Procedure and House Affairs Committee in the subsequent Parliament. Therefore, I tabled a private member's motion to adopt the report. The private member's motion was adopted by the House, but since the subcommittee report had not been tabled in that Parliament, the motion was advisory rather than an order of the House, and no action was taken. However, if you look at Standing Order 108.3c, you will see that the first recommendation of the subcommittee, that there be an estimates committee, has already taken place. That is why you are here today, sitting as the Government Operations and Estimates Committee. And I believe it was in 2002 when I became aware that there were to be changes to the committee mandates. I therefore lobbied for the creation of the Estimates Committee with a mandate according to the subcommittee report, and here you are. Now, if you study the mandate of the Estimates Committee in Standing Order 108.3c, you will see that it is virtually identical to the recommendations of the subcommittee, so that part of the work has been done. Now, as far as I'm aware, however, the Estimates Committee has yet to make full use of the mandate in the standing orders to pick up on the business of supply or examine government spending that is outside the estimates. I believe that is approximately 30% of the total government spending that is voted on through the estimates. The rest is statutory expenditures authorized by the House of Commons and legislation as program spending. With the new mandate, the Estimates Committee can now look and examine spending right across government. You will find the subcommittee report, recommendations 35 to 39, a proposal for the Estimates Committee to examine statutory spending on a cyclical basis using the concept of program evaluation. All government programs should be evaluated on at least once every 10 years to, number one, articulate the public policy objectives of the statutory program, 2, decide whether or not these objectives are being met, 3, whether or not the program is being effectively managed, and number 4, whether there are alternative means of meeting the same policy objectives. These points are virtually identical to a private member's bill that I had on the order paper for a number of years, which never made it to the House for debate. But the point is, the Estimates Committee now has the authority, under Standing Order 103C, Roman numeral 10, to examine statutory expenditures. And to do so, it can ask the House to request that the government conduct program evaluations as outlined above to assist in the committee in its work. The Estimates Committee can also look at loan guarantees and tax expenditures that do not show up anywhere in the financial statements, and Crown corporations that do not report to any other committee. These can represent huge sums of money and important public policy. Therefore, the House needs some way to scrutinize them. That is the role of the Estimates Committee. The Public Service Commission, which is independent of government, therefore cannot report to the House through a minister, now reports directly to the House and referred to the Estimates Committee. But the big item is the consideration of the estimates by Parliament. The most important function of Parliament, control of the public purse, is not even given a perfunctory examination. Many members of Parliament don't understand the process, therefore stay with more politically rewarding agendas. The big problems are, 1, how do you understand this mountain of paper? And 2, if you did understand the paperwork and wanted to make a change, the standing orders and the confidence convention prevent you from doing so. So based on the premise that there is no gain for the pain, the estimates are left untouched and a mystery to many. Supply days are for political football, with never a mention of supply. Now, when I arrived here in 1993, the last supply day in June used to be a full-day debate on the estimates, but even that was changed so that the debate on the estimates does not start till 6:30 p.m. and finishes at 10 o'clock. $270.5 billion fully considered in 3.5 hours. Pretty soon, the House will be examining the estimates at the rate of $100 billion an hour, which is really a sad reflection on the state of our democracy. But if you read the report carefully, you'll find that the subcommittee suggested a methodology by which the House of Commons committees can recommend a reallocation of up to 5% within a department, and even reductions in the estimates without triggering the confidence convention. The report sets out a clear timetable for consideration of the estimates by the committees, and if a House committee recommends a change or a reduction, they must give their reasons for doing so. In response, the President of the Treasury Board can either accept or reject the committee's proposals. If the Treasury Board accepts the committee proposals, a modified royal recommendation can be tabled. However, if the committee recommendation is rejected, reasons must be given, and this should lead to a reasoned debate in the House when the estimates are debated. And it would be nice, of course, Mr. Chairman, if the standing orders were changed to allow more than 3.5 hours of debate in the House. Regardless of the issue, if you change the motivators, you will change the results. Supply days have become political because MPs cannot change the end game. If you allow the process whereby estimates can be reduced, then I would hope that MPs would take the estimates more seriously and hold a number of serious meetings on the issue with senior departmental officials. Now, Mr. Chairman, if I can change the topic slightly, I will talk about the plans and priorities documents themselves. I sat on a committee which revamped the old Part 3's documents into the plans and priority documents, which presented the proposed spending for the coming year within future projections going out 3 years. This was something new. The committee also recommended the introduction of departmental performance reports tabled by the government in the fall. And these two documents, the plans and priorities in the spring, which were forward-looking, and the departmental performance reports, the DPRs, in the fall, which were reporting past experience, should present the form information on a similar manner. The plans and priorities, 3 years going forward, and the DPRs, 3 years of historical information. Unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, I saw these DPRs to be what I called self-serving fluff without any real substance. I therefore wanted the two DPRs selected at random each year for audit by the Auditor General. This way we would know if the DPRs were really telling the story within the department. The Auditor General tabled a report in Parliament about 2007, I believe it was, explaining the methodology by which DPRs could be audited, but since I've been gone for a few years, I'm not sure if the Auditor General has in fact audited some of these DPRs. Mr. Chairman, the Government Operations and Estimates Committee has a wide-ranging mandate, and I hope that this committee will utilize that mandate fully to make the examination of the estimates by Parliament a meaningful exercise. It's why Parliament came into being, and the control of the public purse remains its most important function. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams. This is exactly why we asked you here as a witness, because of your deep and long experience with the subject, and I'm well aware you were the co-author, I believe, of the report with Catterall, I believe, was it not?
Correct, yeah.
And we're certainly using that as a starting point to rest assured that the recommendations from the 1995, although didn't really get into 1998 study, and the 2003 study, both form the basis of where we're going with this project. And we're quite sincere about firm, legitimate recommendations that will be, I hope, adopted. We're going to go right to questions then. Alexander Boularice for the NDP.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le...
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Williams, for your in-depth presentation. We have exceptional witnesses today. I enjoyed the reference to the Magna Carta, the signature of which led to parliamentarianism, and that Parliament was created to do the things that we are unfortunately unable to do today. In other words, examine the expenditures. I'll be asking you the similar questions as to what I asked the previous witness. You're a member of an international or global organization. I'd like to refer to your knowledge. Is there any way that we can compare ourselves to others in a positive way or a negative way? Are we not looking too good internationally in terms of the parliamentarians' ability to control and verify expenditures?
Well, the two things in response, Mr. Chairman, as you know, Canada is a beacon to the world. And long it may continue to be a beacon to the world as far as democracy is concerned, although in many ways, when you look closely, it's perhaps not as vibrant and robust here as it should be. But Parliament has the authority. Have no doubt that Parliament is the supreme institution of the land if you want it to be that way. And therefore, there is nothing outside your capacity if you collectively as a Parliament decide to do that. So you have the power collectively if you use it.
Yeah. Makes me think I'm somebody saying, don't let anybody tell you you can't do that. Like the spirit. À ce propos,
on this point, there's a degree of skepticism rather, or pessimism perhaps, on the end result of this particular study we're undertaking, which is significant, but it's not the first. You know that there was a study in '98. There were recommendations that led nowhere. The 2003 study that has not led to any changes to the system. It feels as though even if we were to perhaps agree, it doesn't always happen or doesn't happen often, if the executive has no desire to change things and wants to maintain control. You know, when there's a great deal of mystery surrounding things, then parliamentarians have very little authority, and essentially the government is holding all of the weapons on its side, if you will. Even if we were to have a unanimous agreement, if the Prime Minister's office says no, well, what do you think it really requires to bring about some kind of positive change?
Well, I would like to see the Estimates Committee, first of all, collectively study the mandate that you now have in the standing orders under 1083C, which is wide-ranging and virtually limitless. You can look at everything that the government spends. You do not really need a change in the standing orders. Then don't get caught up in this confidence convention. Program spending is now within your mandate. Mr. Marlowe, the previous witness, said, set out a 5-year plan. The Business of Supply report said not a 5-year plan, but decide if you're going to look at any specific program of spending that the government does. Then you can ask through the House that an evaluation be done by the experts. The Parliamentary Budget Office has now appeared on the scene since this report was written. But there is a discipline called program evaluation that can give you a report of something of this magnitude on a particular program, asking 4 questions. 1, what is the mission that this program is designed to achieve within the country? Number 2, is it performing and fulfilling that mandate? Number 3, is it doing it efficiently and well? And number 4, is there a better way to do the same things? These are simple, fundamental questions that are long-ranging in their application. Do not invoke confidence. And if you can get the professionals, the program evaluators, to give you a report of this magnitude on a program, you as a Parliament can now become engaged and make recommendations to the government that they would listen to going forward. And therefore you can be very effective, in my opinion, if you act as a collegial committee moving forward and examining pieces of government spending in detail.
Well, you've got about 30 seconds if you'd like to.
Si on a un peu de temps, j'aimerais vous entendre sur...
If there is some time left, I'd like to hear what you have to say about the problems relating to this very long cycle for authorizing expenditures. In other words, when we study the main estimates, we could compare that document with practically nothing, because there are no SUPs, A, B, and C. There's no link to the budget document, the budget itself. So we look at the main estimates, but we have no point of comparison. So it's like comparing apples and oranges. It's difficult.
Don't get caught up with the budget. I agree with Mr. Marlowe. It's a separate document. It's a policy document. But the plans and priorities now give you 3 years going on, so you get this year's proposed spending in context. And I made mention in my statement that the departmental performance reports, which are the historical reporting against the budget, with 3 years of historical information should be two comparable documents, one saying where they were going and the other one saying did they actually go where they said they were going. And I call these departmental performance reports self-serving fluff, which is why the Auditor General developed a methodology for auditing them to ensure that they give Parliament the information that they need. So you have 6 years of forward and retrospective numbers. And I think that this gives you the capacity to make the analysis in order to ensure that the programs are effective. Coupled with program evaluation, it can be done, I think, if you work collegially as a committee.
Thank you, Alexander. Kelly Block for the Conservatives. Kelly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I also want to thank you for being with us today, Mr. Williams. I've appreciated your presentation as well as the presentation just before you, and I know you were here for part of it. You were a member of Parliament for 15 years, and you served as the chair of the Public Accounts Committee, as well as, and I think you mentioned, a member of the subcommittee on the business of supply of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. And I want to pick up on one of the last statements you made in response to my colleague's question. And you said, if you act as a collegial committee. And recently we heard from a former member of Parliament, Joe Jordan, that the estimates process is a terrible partisan mechanism for trying to embarrass the government, especially when ministers come to committee to present their estimates. And so I think throughout this study we've come to understand that we're in a partisan environment, and you yourself said there's no gain for the pain when it comes to doing maybe the work that we need to do. How do we change that culture?
Well, I think you change the culture by changing the focus of the committee. If you change the focus of the committee to evaluating programs rather than looking at the estimates that have to go through the House by June, confidence applies, the government is standing absolutely firm, you beat your head, nothing moves. If you change that to let's look at programs and let's look at the efficiency and the effectiveness of these programs going out to 3 and 5 years. Not that dissimilar to what Mr. Marlowe was talking about, your 5-year plan. But if you want to say, and take for example, I'll use something that's in the debate right now, the retirement age and the qualification for OAS. That's going to be something that's going to come in over a number of years. There's no confidence attached to having an opinion on something that's going to be introduced down the road. So you can have your say on that, your input into that, and any other program that you desire to comment on, given the fact that you have the program evaluators giving you the technical detail. The reason it's all political today is because you have no details, so you take political swipes at the minister, who takes a political swipe back, and nothing has changed. But if you're discussing intellectually the detail of a program that's maybe not as well focused as it could be, or should be, or not as well managed as it could be, you have something intelligent to contribute.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if you were here at the very beginning of Mr. Marlowe's testimony, but he shared with us that he wanted to start by debunking some myths. And if we agree with his assumptions or his suggestions that we do have enough information, that it is relevant to the work that we do as parliamentarians, and that the timing of the introduction of the mains and the budget isn't an issue, and you've suggested that we have a wide-ranging mandate, what are some of the first steps that we can take as a committee? One or two. I know, you know, the report that was tabled when you were on the committee, the subcommittee, this committee was formed. So what are the one or two first steps we could take as a committee?
Well, I would say step back from this hard political position of the estimates of this particular year and decide as a committee that you're going to review some programs over the next 3 to 5 years, not that dissimilar to what Mr. Marlowe was saying, and you'll find that this report that was tabled in 1997 talked about program evaluation on what is a program designed to do for society anyway. Is it doing what it's supposed to do? Is it doing it effectively and being well managed? And is there a better way to achieve the same results? When you answer, you have the answer to these 4 questions, and say these become a reasoned intellectual examination of programs that are ongoing, and I'm sure the government would welcome that, because here we are in a period of fiscal austerity and trying to ensure that government is focused and well managed, that they would surely welcome a report from Parliament saying that some programs can be adjusted, maybe even eliminated, maybe improved, expanded, or whatever. Your opinion matters.
Okay, thank you.
You only had about 10 seconds left anyway, Kelly, so thank you. Denis Blanchette, 5 minutes, Denis.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Williams. I'm pleased to see one of the spiritual fathers, if you will, of this committee. It's a pleasure. And perhaps you will be able to shed some light for us on a few points. Most of the recommendations you've made were not actually applied or adopted. Neither did that happen to the 2003 report. I think if you've looked at our work, you might have the impression that we're sort of reinventing the wheel, or we're starting up again. It's as though we hadn't understood something. In your view, what could we do so as not to repeat the mistakes of 98 and 2000, or repeat rather what was done in 98 and in 2003, so that this work could actually help improve or change things?
Well, I would start, Mr. Chairman, by having an in-camera meeting of the members to say, let's look at our standing order mandate. It is broad, it is wide-ranging, it covers all parts of government, and decide how you're going to look and examine government spending beyond just the estimates that are tabled on the first week of March or the beginning of March and have to be voted on and confidence is attached. Move away from there. Don't leave it behind, but don't make it your primary focus. And say, how can this estimates committee look at government spending, look at loan guarantees, look at tax expenditures. Tax expenditures, by virtue of the fact that they are deducted from people's income tax, means that there's no revenue, there's no expenditure, there's no program, there's nothing. There is nothing that comes before Parliament on tax expenditures that gives you information. And yet they can be huge public policies. Our RSP contributions being one of the major tax deductions and tax expenditures that don't show up anywhere. These are the things that you can look at. Then you can table a report in the House asking for the government to provide detailed evaluations of this kind of magnitude that gives you detailed managerial information on how this program is doing, and then go forward from there. This is where I think you can make the greatest impact and influence government spending down the road. Now, if you take a look at the 52 recommendations, program evaluation is a big one. Reallocation within a department of up to 5% gives you the potential tools to say, not there, but there, without invoking confidence that the government would agree, provided you put forth reasonable, rational reasons for your proposal. And the government would then have to respond, we accept or we don't accept, and here are our reasons for doing so. And that allows a reasoned and intelligent debate on the House, which, when you bring that kind of attitude, reduces the partisanship and makes it much more meaningful. And you're here to represent the wishes of your constituents rather than just throw political barbs across the table. And therefore, they get more confidence in the work that you do.
Okay, so similarly to the previous witness, you're talking about reducing partisanship, because at this point it is unprecedented, the level of partisanship we've seen. I know before I arrived here, I was told that parliamentarianism was, first off, the ability for people to get along. It seems as though it's the inability to agree or get along, rather. I'd like to talk about another point. With respect to instruments that are available, if we had all the details we need, it would be monstrous, the heft of it. Perhaps you could comment on this. the previous witness seemed to be saying that the PBO could be an instrument that could be of great assistance to us in our work. What do you think of this?
I think that the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, can assist committees such as this immensely. I agree with Mr. Marlowe. He should be an officer of Parliament. I also think that by making him an officer of Parliament, he doesn't get stuck out there on a limbo wondering what he can and cannot do, what authority he has and doesn't have, and he becomes his own little soapbox rather than a support mechanism for the committee. And that, I think, is important. The Auditor General supports the Public Accounts Committee. Her report, or his report, is tabled and referred to the committee. And you have this close relationship between documentary support by the Auditor General and the committee's capacity to inquire from witnesses. Parliamentary Budget Officer should be doing the same, giving you the report so that you, as the members of Parliament, can ask the important questions. Right now, because the Parliamentary Budget Officer really doesn't have a reporting mechanism, he has his own press conferences and speaks in public. Auditor General doesn't do that. So I would think that you should be looking around the same lines for the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Officer of Parliament, reporting here, giving his reports to you, and you ask the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Thank you, Mr. Blanchet. If I might just say that the good old days when parliamentary committees used to operate and function well, people are usually talking about the Public Accounts Committee as chaired by Mr. Williams as being sort of the golden Camelot era of when Parliament used to work.
Not Camelot, Mr.
Not
Chairman.
quite
it
Camelot.
was partisan then, too.
Anyway, I'm sorry, Ron Cannon, 5 minutes, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Talk about the good old days. It's good to have Mr. Williams back, and welcome to the committee, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and insight. And it's kind of like deja vu. You look at 98, 2003, and just go along. You take these reports, and you retire as an MP and travel around the world and rebrand them and sell them to other countries. So I see you were in Australia, and I was looking through your report, and it was the Parliamentary Accountability in Victoria in 2007. And our committee is going to have a former clerk of the Australian Senate by the name of Harry Evans before our committee next Wednesday. And we're just wondering if there's any best practices by the Australian provincial or federal government which you think we should consider for this committee.
I'm not an expert on the Australian system, but there's always need and opportunity for review and evolution, and no particular parliament has it right. Our culture is different. Parliament is partisan. That is why we're here. We're here to debate and hopefully come to an agreement, and majority vote is deemed to be an agreement. And we can be vociferous in our opposition, but we come to an agreement without pulling out the guns, and that's a wonderful thing in this country, that we don't have to worry about these kinds of things as they resolve it in other countries. And as long as we can do that, and do it with an intellectual commitment to serving our constituents. The partisanship is when you don't have the intellectual supporting underpinnings of your debate. And that is why I think it's important for the committee to look at the program evaluation to ensure that you have substance by which you can debate. Anybody can throw political barbs across the table. One-liners abound, but they don't do anything. But if you really want to make a contribution to the way this government, any government, manages the country, Parliament needs documentary analysis before it to make that informed opinion. The government governs subject to the approval of Parliament. Parliament does not govern. It holds the government accountable for the way it governs in the Westminster model. And that is why you need to have the information with Program X or Program Y. Is it being done to serve the people well? And when you have that information, ask these questions and you table your report and say, we as a parliament report to the government that we feel that you should be changing your focus on this particular program, or it's not being managed effectively, or it could be done in a better way, I'm sure the government would welcome that.
Okay, thank you. Coming back to a 1998 report and 14 years later and the experience you have and traveled, and one of the recommendations was for the standing committee to be able to reallocate funds during the consideration of the estimates. And I'm just wondering, do you think that recommendation still holds true today?
Absolutely, for two reasons. One, Parliament has an opinion. Of course, you're here because you have an opinion. You're here because you represent the opinions of your citizens who elected you. And there's no guarantee that the government is all-knowing and got everything right. You're entitled to express your opinion. If you say, instead of spending all the money over there, why don't you put some of it over here? If that is your opinion and is reasoned and rational, the government might listen to you. And at the same time also, by giving you, knowing that you have this authority to move money or recommend that money be moved, not spent here but spent there, gives you the incentive to look at the information, knowing that your contribution can count. If you know that your contribution can count, if you're just going to get batted away, then, as I say sometimes, if people have no responsibility, they act irresponsibly. And that just feeds to the partisanship. But if you have this authority and this capacity, there's no doubt in my mind you will accept it and deal with it professionally and make a contribution to the country.
30 seconds or so,
Okay,
Ron.
quick question, and just following up my wise colleague, Mr. Braid, when he was asking Mr. Marlowe as far as a special appropriation committee, maybe elaborate your thoughts on having a designated committee.
Well, the Appropriations Committee and Estimates Committee are not that significantly different. You will see in the 52 recommendations we talked about the longevity, improving the longevity of the Estimates Committee, trying to build internal expertise by the MPs that sit on the committee. That was not the same detail as Mr. Marlowe, but referenced in this committee recommendations. I fully support the professionalism of committee members by staying on the one committee for a number of years. I was on the Public Accounts Committee for 15 years, and I enjoyed every minute of it. And I think that developing a capacity to understand and make a contribution will only happen if you stick with a committee for some time.
That's it, Ron. Thank you very much. For the Liberals, John McCallum. 5 minutes, John.
Thank you, and welcome back, Mr. Williams. I like your section where you talk about evaluating in a cyclical way the various programs. But I guess my first question is, who would do the evaluations? Because if the people who run the programs evaluate their own programs, then you might get rather positive fluff, as I think was your expression, coming back at you. So who would carry out this evaluation?
There is, I'm sure they're still there, Mr. McCallum, within the government division called Program Evaluation. These are professional program evaluators with a skill on evaluation. These are not just the same people within the department who are running the program to write a report on their own work. These are, in essence, like internal auditors, but they're evaluators of looking forward rather than auditors looking backwards. So the skill and the expertise resides within the Government of Canada to independently assess the effectiveness of programs. And that is why you would table in the House of Commons, because you have no authority as a committee on your own, you would table in the House of Commons that the government perform an evaluation of the programs that are of interest to this committee and report back. And now you have something that's equivalent to an Auditor General's report, perhaps even a lot more detail, that gives you the analysis of the program, how well and how effective it is in serving the interest of why the program was created. And that way, with the real knowledge, you can make the recommendations, if you have any, as to change or focus.
Well, having spent some time in government and done in the Expenditure Review Committee, I don't remember this species of person called a neutral program evaluator. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I would have thought that even if you have that person, the committee will get what the government wants it to get. And so I was thinking, why not use the Parliamentary Budget Officer or some other independent body that works for the committee, not for the government, to spearhead this thing, possibly in conjunction with these people you described, but I don't think you want all of the determination of the reports to be put into the hands of the people running the program or even of the government.
Yeah, I agree, Mr. McCallum, and as I say, when we wrote this report, the PBO did not exist, and I made my point that I think the Parliamentary Budget Officer should be an officer of Parliament serving this committee, very much like the Auditor General serves the Public Accounts Committee, and therefore would have the staff and the resources to do that program evaluation, and also the access to the documentation too. That would require legislation. The Auditor General has the act for the Auditor General that gives the Auditor General access to the documentation. PBO would need that same kind of legislation.
Okay, I guess I now come then. I think we agree so far. I now come to some of the issues my NDP colleagues have been raising. Why would the government want this committee to have that information in the first place? Because the government would generally prefer to feed us stuff that it wants us to have, not give us a capacity to dig out stuff that they may not want us to have. I mean, they're doing expenditure review. If they want to get rid of a program or cut it, they can cut it without having some nagging little parliamentary committee telling it what to do and digging up dirty things which they might not want us to know about. So why would the government want to cooperate with us on this?
Well, you can have government downsizing and government efficiency either as a political process or as a managerial process. And every 10 or 15 years, along comes the time when the political hammer comes down and says, we're going to cut. And the Liberals have done it, and the Conservatives have done it, and it'll happen before that, and it'll happen again after this. And why do we have to wait for the political process rather than have an ongoing managerial process that ensures that programs are done efficiently, effectively, and well?
Okay, again, we don't disagree. I think it's worth a try. And I'm not holding this Conservative government any more responsible than I would the government of which I was a part of. But I do think governments tend to not want to share information unless they have to. But I think Tony Clement did indicate in his letter a willingness to cooperate with us. So I do think it's worth a try. But my only point is that these things have been tried in the past, not always with success. But I certainly agree with you, it's worth an effort.
Two points. First of all, it's not a case of sharing because government doesn't share with government. Government reports to Parliament. And remember that Parliament is over the government and can demand anything from government that it wants. And number two, when people are held accountable on the small things, it prevents the big things from happening. And therefore, some minor managerial problems within an institution the size of the Government of Canada is not going to bring the government down, but it is going to keep them focused on ensuring good services for Canadians.
Thank you.
Your time is up. John, Bernard Trottier for the Conservatives.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Williams, for coming in. I think you and Mr. Marleau today have maybe injected a different way of looking at the problem. You know, we've been very focused in the last couple of weeks on this question of a reconciliation between the budget and the estimates, and looking at things like the timing of the budget or looking at the fiscal calendar, for example, and making that the focus. And some of the witnesses came in and talked about how they do it in other countries. There is this anomalous situation, I suppose you could say, that the budget for all of the Canadian government isn't approved until about June, and the fiscal year's already started. But as you pointed out, and Mr. Marleau pointed out, that the budget itself is actually more of a policy document, a longer-term policy document. Some of the changes won't even take place until 2013 or 2014, for example. So, you know, the need for a reconciliation with the main estimates isn't perhaps there. And what you're suggesting is that we should really look at a different focus for a committee like this one, because ultimately what's more important than that accounting exercise is really the ability of Parliament to scrutinize government spending and, as you point out, hold government to account. And what I'm hearing from you is that rather than look at this broad but shallow look at the estimates that we tend to use right now, let's look at more of a narrow and deep look at the estimates and focus on a narrower program, for example, and looking at the plans and priorities documents and the departmental performance reports. Can you I mean, has that ever happened with this committee where there was a decision to do some deeper, narrower dives in your experience with this committee?
I'm not aware that the committee have done that. That's why I recommended that you have an in-camera meeting to take a close look at your mandate, because I think if you haven't read it, you'll be surprised how wide and deep and broad range your mandate is. Therefore, you can go anywhere you want. But therefore, that's why you would want to either beef up the PBO or get the government to do these evaluations and provide you with information or to do the deep analysis of individual programs that are of interest to this committee.
I think to Mr. McCallum's point is, you know, there could be some reluctance on the part of the government to expose itself in certain ways, and so I guess there's going to be some importance as to which programs you choose to investigate. But I like your suggestion, though, that if you look at some of the smaller areas of spending, the bigger pictures tend to take care of themselves. What would be a right mandate for choosing which programs to look at, what to dive into?
Well, I don't know that I'm going to go there, Mr. Chairman, but you're right that if you have a new process, everybody stands back and says, oh, I don't think this will work. I don't want to go down that road. And after a while, it becomes part of the process, and it's an ongoing affair. So here is the opportunity for the Government Ops and Estimates Committee to start something new that makes a contribution to the governance of this country, to ensure that people are well served by the taxes that they pay and the programs that are delivered to them. And you can make a meaningful contribution in this way, and therefore that's why I recommend it, rather than the superficial look at the stack of documents this big that represents $270 billion worth of expenditures. There's nothing in there that allows you to ask an intelligent, meaningful question. But if you had the program evaluation, you could do that.
Yeah. Just a quick follow-up. How many programs, ballpark, would there be if we're looking at more of a sampling approach to studying the estimates?
I have no idea. I could throw out a guess and say 1,000, but
1,000?
I really have no idea.
So in a given year, a committee like this one could look at, in terms of doing a significant and material dive into that program. We could maybe look at 10 programs in a year, maybe 50. I don't know, probably not 50.
No, you wouldn't look at 50, but if you looked at 10, but the other thing, of course, is the randomness too. And, you know, as I say, you change the motivators, change the results. And this is why I wanted the Auditor General to do these audits on departmental performance reports, and to pick 2 at random every year, because if you're coming up next year and you're going to be reported to Parliament as having written some self-serving fluff, is what I call them, then you're going to be in the hot seat before the Public Accounts Committee, and that's not a great place to be. So you put the effort into writing a good report. Same with the management of the programs. If you think that you're going to be sitting right here trying to explain to some parliamentary committee why your program is being poorly and badly managed, you're going to say, I better do something before I get there. It's a motivator. Change the motivators, you might get better results. It's great.
Yeah, so it's, in a way, it's...
Thank you, Bernard. You're well over your 5 minutes.
I'm over my time, so thank you for your input.
And we have time for 1.5 rounds, well, maybe even 2 full rounds. Matthew Ravignac is next.
I'd like to ask you about, since you are from, the Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption, so I'd like you to talk about a little bit about the relationship between corruption and this committee, and what I mean by that is specifically what major changes would be necessary to ensure that this committee can play a role in avoiding corruption.
The concept of avoiding corruption, I appreciate the question very much, is when you are held accountable, you tend to do things right. And here we are in a democracy. We have the media, the reports, what goes on in committee. We have television and so on. The public know what is going on here. And if they don't like what they're doing, what's going on here, they have the opportunity to change at the next election or to send you back again because they like what you're doing. In dictatorships around the world, there is no accountability. And when there's no accountability, people steal the cash by the billions of dollars. And when they steal the money, the people are destitute. When you look around the world and you see all these poor people on television, they're starving, they're dying of this, that, and the next thing, it is because of bad governance, not because of lack of aid. Bad governance. And why is it bad governance? Because the people cannot hold the government accountable. Nobody has ever voted for poverty. And therefore, why is half the world poor and 1.5 billion people destitute? It is because they cannot exercise accountability over the government as we do here in Canada. And that is what we're trying to instill around the world, is accountable governance. And this committee is about accountability. You look at government spending and you approve it or you don't approve it. And if you can have the House to agree with you not to approve it, then let's have an election and fight it out. That's the way we do it in this country. It's called accountability. And let the people ultimately decide. But in far too many countries around the world, that opportunity doesn't exist, and they're left in absolute and total poverty with no capacity to demand services from the government.
What was interesting is we had a delegation here a few months ago from, was it Kenya? And they were setting up a number of committees, and they came to study what our committee did. And I'd have to say we had some difficulty explaining to them exactly what we did, and rightfully so. They had some difficulty understanding what we were about. So, but have you heard of this committee and the structure in Canada being served as a model for other countries? And has it been properly exported in that way?
I haven't heard about the Estimates Committee and the process here within the Parliament of Canada being used elsewhere. But the fundamental concept of parliamentary committees investigating and reporting on specific issues to the House having the capacity to hold the government accountable in full view of the public, is why we are a strong and prosperous nation. And we look around the world, Kenya and elsewhere, where they have very, very serious problems regarding services to the people, because the people cannot hold the government accountable. Now, if they had an estimates committee that reported to the people and said the government is taking the money and going away with it, corruption is rife. Talking about Kenya, I believe the last I heard that an MP salary in Kenya was greater than an MP salary in Canada. But they have to pay for the funerals of the constituents, they have to pay for this, they've got to pay for that, and they run an informal welfare program out of the parliamentary office. We don't do that here, because we demand accountability, but over there they can shell out, or maybe not shell out the money. And if they don't, it's theirs. It's not accountable. It's not transparent. It is unethical, and that is why we are prosperous and they're not so.
Your time is up, Matthew, and we've got a couple of minutes left. Mike, you wanted to say a few words?
Just a very briefly, Mr. Williams, thank you very much for coming. Very, very interesting presentation. If we were going to go the program evaluation route, and right along what Mr. McCallum was saying, my concern would be that we would get people, we would be calling witnesses that, well, this program is the greatest thing since sliced bread. If you change it or reduce it or eliminate it, I'm going to suffer, my family's going to suffer, our community's going to suffer. Or on the other side, well, there's a program in the budget, Katimavic, for example, that's being no longer funded in future years. And if we had that kind of thing, how do we, is there a way of taking the politics out of that discussion so that we are actually talking to a program evaluator who's got 5 or 6 criteria that they're evaluating against, and the media, and we don't use it as political fodder to say, well, these guys are the worst thing since sliced bread or whatever. Do you have any suggestions in that area?
Yeah, your witnesses are going to be the public servants. They're not going to be representatives out of society, because everybody in society is, I remember when I came down here in 1993 and we had a very serious budgetary issue of huge deficits, and I was at the Finance Committee, and every 10 minutes we have a new witness. And every witness said two things. One, cut, but don't cut me. Tax, but don't tax me. And I said, well, who's left? Nobody was left. Yeah. So the issue is the management of the program. It is not the recipient of the program that you want to hear from. So don't bring in the people who say, no, you can't cut me. I'm enjoying this program because, hey, whatever it does for me. No, you want to say, what is the public policy that this program is designed to address? Is it doing it well? And hear from the public servants. If you have an opinion by the evaluation team saying this program spills over and is giving far too many more people the benefit compared to what the program was designed to do, then you can make your recommendation. But we have to be very careful. I remember one time I was at a seminar here in the House, and we had the chief statistician from the province of Newfoundland and Labrador was talking about employment insurance. Employment insurance, he said, showed significant, when they brought in employment insurance in Newfoundland, it created a significant improvement in education in Newfoundland and a significant improvement in the health care in Newfoundland. And so it wasn't a case of just pay insurance, employment insurance, or not pay employment insurance. It had spillover ramifications. And as public policy people, these are the things that you have to think about. When this is not a private sector corporation designed to make money. This is here to serve Canadians in the best way possible. And that's why one of the questions on evaluation is there a better way to do the same thing? Because sometimes these not obvious benefits come to the fore through evaluation. And these are the types of things that you as parliamentarians need to know, so that you can tell the government, we agree with this particular program, or we think that it should be changed.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you very much, Mr. Williams. Your presentation was as interesting as we knew it would be, and you are certainly welcome here anytime as we wrestle with this subject. We may even have cause to call you back. I want to thank you for teaching me one new word, scootage. Learned a new bad word now, that if it means taxes, that might sneak its way into my vocabulary.
If I may correct you, Mr. Chairman, that's not a new word, that's an old word.
A very old
1215.
I see.
Magna Carta, that was how they described taxes in those days, which may have been a bad word, too.
Certainly new to me, anyways. The other thing I should remind you, along the questioning from Denis, a former colleague of ours, Roy Cullen, wrote a very good book called The Poverty of Corrupt Nations. Which came first? Are they corrupt because they're poor, or poor because they're corrupt? And it certainly speaks to some of the many issues that you deal with very capably.
Mr. Cullen is part of the Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption. He leads our Global Task Force on Anti-Money Laundering because he has the expertise. And tomorrow night, if I allow me the advert, Mr. Chair, yes. Tomorrow night across the hall in the railway room after the votes, or at 6 o'clock, I'm having a meeting. I want to get Canadian parliamentarians engaged. Please come and find out how you can carry your knowledge and your expertise to parliamentarians around the world as they wrestle with the same problems that you do. How do we serve the people who elected us?
I would very highly recommend we all get to that meeting. I've been a member of GOPAC, I think, since its founding, and feel very strongly of the good work they do. Thank you so much for being with us, Mr. Williams, and we'll see you tomorrow night.
Thank you.
This meeting is just to remind everyone, we have a planning meeting tomorrow, 1 p.m., I believe.
Promenade.
In the Promenade.
We'll
see you there. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.